St. Mercy is hungry. At 3:13 in the morning, the telephone beside Mara Voss's bed began ringing. Nobody had called that landline in 6 years. She answered on the 7th ring and heard the wet, mechanical breathing of a ventilator. Something scraped against the receiver. Then a man whispered through a mouthful of liquid, "Dr. Voss, you left someone open." Mara's stomach tightened. "I'm not a doctor. You were that night." The caller exhaled a bubbling laugh. Behind him, dozens of voices began screaming. The line went dead. Mara already knew where the call had come from. St. Mercy Hospital had been abandoned for 20 years, ever since the night its surgical wing flooded with blood, and 37 people disappeared. Mara had been a pathology assistant then. She remembered fleeing the autopsy room while something inside the final corpse hammered against its own rib cage. She had never told anyone that part. An hour later, she stood before St. Mercy with a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. The hospital's black windows stared down like empty eye sockets. Rainwater streamed over the brickwork. Above the entrance, the headless statue of an angel held out 2 stone hands, as though begging Mara to turn around. The front doors opened before she touched them. Warm air rolled over her. It smelled of disinfectant, spoiled meat, and an infected wound trapped beneath a bandage. Mara stepped inside. Her boots stuck to the floor. The lobby tiles were coated in a dark syrup that glistened beneath her flashlight. She crouched and touched it with the crowbar. A string of clotting blood stretched from the metal. Somewhere in the building, a heart began beating. The lights flickered on one after another, drawing a path toward the surgical wing. Mara followed. With every step, the hospital became warmer. Veins crawled beneath the wallpaper. They pulsed when she passed. Hair had sprouted from the ceiling in damp black clumps, and the drinking fountains dribbled pink water that smelled faintly of copper. She reached the red ward at 4:06. The corridor beyond its doors was no longer a corridor. Flesh bulged through the cracked tiles in thick, glistening folds. Rusted gurneys had sunk halfway into the walls, their wheels twitching like insect legs. Human teeth crowded the air vents. Each tooth chattered independently, producing a sound like freezing rain striking glass. Something moved beneath an overturned bed. A hand slid into view. Its fingers were nearly 3 feet long, each one tipped with a yellow surgical needle instead of a nail. The rest of the creature dragged itself forward wearing the remains of an orderly's uniform. It had no lower body. Its spine trailed behind it like a bloody tail. The skin of its head had split vertically, and the 2 halves opened and closed like jaws. Inside was a second face, small, pale, and unfinished, chewing frantically on the creature's exposed tongue. Mara backed away. The orderly snapped its head toward her. "Late!" it gurgled. It lunged. Mara swung the crowbar. The hooked end punched through its cheek and tore free in a spray of black blood and broken teeth. The creature shrieked, wrapped its long fingers around her ankle and squeezed. Needles pierced her boot. She struck again, crushing the tiny face inside its skull. The thing convulsed. Its body burst down the middle, spilling ropes of intestine that slapped against the tiles like angry eels. The intestines twisted around her crowbar. Mara released it and ran. The walls contracted as she passed, squeezing blood from cracks in the plaster. Hands pushed outward beneath the wallpaper. Fingers scratched for purchase, tearing their nails off from the other side. "Dr. Voss," they moaned, "come finish us." She reached the chapel and slammed the door behind her. Candles ignited. Mara stared down an aisle lined with pews made from fused ribs. Melted human shapes knelt on either side, their bodies welded together by ropes of tendon. Some still wore hospital gowns. Others had intravenous tubes disappearing into their throats. At the altar stood the choir. It reached nearly to the vaulted ceiling, a tower of skulls, mouths, and peeled torsos woven together inside a cage of curved bone. Hearts hung throughout its body like swollen fruit. Each one beat at a different rhythm. The choir inhaled. Every mouth opened. The scream blasted Mara backward. The kneeling things rose as one, their bodies tore apart where they had fused, leaving strips of skin stretched between them. They crawled toward her, dragging ropes of exposed muscle across the floor. Mara snatched a candle stand and swung it into the closest one. Its head collapsed like rotten fruit. Gray brain matter splattered across her face and slid between her lips. She gagged. The thing kept crawling. Its ruined skull opened wider. Splintered bone clamped around her forearm, slicing through her sleeve. Mara drove the candle stand down its throat until the metal point punched from its back. Another creature caught her hair. She felt cold fingers press behind her left eye. Mara screamed and threw herself sideways. A handful of her scalp tore loose, with a sound like wet cloth ripping. Blood poured down her neck. The choir began to sing. The song had no words, yet Mara understood it. They had been waiting beneath St. Mercy long before the hospital was built. The doctors had awakened them with blood, fed them with amputated limbs and organs, and taught them how to wear human bodies. 20 years ago, the thing on Mara's autopsy table hadn't been dead. It had been giving birth. The choir split down its center. A shape pushed through the opening, squeezing between broken ribs. It wore the stretched face of Dr. Howard Vale, St. Mercy's former chief surgeon. His skin had been pulled over a body made from hundreds of interlocking hands. "Mara," Vale said. His lips tore at the corners when he smiled. "You never completed my examination." The hands carried him down the altar steps. Some walked on their fingertips. Others reached inside the creature's body, kneading its organs. Mara grabbed a fallen scalpel. Vale stopped before her and opened his chest. His ribs unfolded like the petals of a white flower. Behind them, dozens of eyes rolled in a nest of twitching muscle. They all focused on Mara. "Remove the heart," he said. "I watched you die." "No, you watched me hatch." The chapel doors burst open. The mutilated orderly crawled inside, dragging its spilled organs behind it. The creatures in the pews seized Mara's arms and forced her toward Vale. She plunged the scalpel into the eye-filled cavity. Vale screamed. Every light in St. Mercy exploded. The hands forming his body lost their grip. Fingers, wrists, and forearms rained across the altar, twitching in pools of gore. The choir thrashed against its bone cage. Its dangling hearts ruptured one after another, spraying the chapel with jets of steaming blood. Mara ripped herself free and ran behind the altar. There she found an elevator. Its doors opened onto darkness. She stepped inside and hit the lowest button. Sub-basement 6. The elevator descended. Something landed on its roof. Long fingers slid through the seam between the doors. Needles scraped sparks from the steel. The orderly peeled the doors apart and thrust its split head into the elevator. Mara stabbed the tiny interface. The scalpel entered its eye and sank to the handle. Its mouth opened. A flood of grave-warm blood struck Mara in the face. It filled her nose and throat. She swallowed before she could stop herself. The blood moved inside her stomach. It crawled upward. Mara grabbed the creature's jaw and pulled until the head came apart. Cartilage snapped. Blackened meat tore loose in stringy clumps, exposing a skull riddled with squirming holes. The orderly fell away. The elevator reached the bottom. Its doors opened. Mara stepped into ankle-deep water. The chamber beneath St. Mercy was larger than the hospital itself. Pipes as wide as subway tunnels crossed overhead. Chains hung from darkness. Red emergency lights flashed across concrete walls that flexed inward and outward with every thunderous beat. At the center of the chamber was the heart. It was the size of a house. Ribs encircled it like the legs of a spider. Blind eyes rolled across its surface. Mouths opened between swollen arteries, gasping and vomiting clotted blood into the water. Thousands of umbilical cords rose from it and vanished into the ceiling. St. Mercy wasn't infested. St. Mercy was its body. The heart saw Mara. A pale arm erupted from its surface and struck the water. Then another, then hundreds. They reached toward her, fingernails peeling from the concrete as they dragged the heart closer. Mara turned toward the elevator. The doors had disappeared behind a wall of flesh. The choir's song vibrated through the chamber. The heart split open. Inside were the 37 people who had vanished 20 years ago. They floated in a lake of yellow fluid, still wearing their uniforms, their faces untouched by age. Every one of them opened their eyes. Dr. Vale crawled from the cavity, his severed hands pulling him across the heart's slick surface. "You left someone open," he said again. Mara looked down. A thin red line had appeared along her stomach. It widened. Her skin separated without pain. Her abdomen opened from ribs to pelvis, revealing organs that no longer belonged to her. Tiny faces covered her intestines. They blinked in the cold air. Her liver had grown teeth. Something behind her stomach clawed its way upward, cracking her ribs from the inside. Mara tried to scream. A small hand emerged from her mouth and gripped her lower lip. It pulled until the lip tore away. More fingers crowded behind her teeth. They forced her jaws apart until the hinges popped, and the flesh of her cheeks split toward her ears. The thing climbed out through her ruined mouth. It was newborn-sized but ancient, red and glistening, with Dr. Vale's smiling face stretched across its skull. Mara collapsed. The bloody infant crawled across the water and pressed itself against the heart. The organ swallowed it lovingly. Then the heart turned every eye toward Mara. She lay emptied on the floor, watching her own intestines slither away like snakes. Her heartbeat slowed. One beat, then another, then nothing. For a moment the chamber was silent. Mara's eyes opened again. She stood in her bedroom. The telephone was ringing. Her body appeared whole, but something heavy shifted beneath her skin whenever she breathed. She answered. On the other end, a frightened woman whispered, "Hello?" Mara tried to warn her. Instead, her jaw opened far too wide. The voices inside her began to scream, and somewhere beneath the city, St. Mercy started beating again.